So I just wanted to check to see if there was any pressing business that we needed to make sure didn't fall off the end of the meeting first. Any takers? Let me put David on the spot. How's that container brigade going?
Hey, I wrote an email about it.
Excellent.
Progress.
Some progress, yes. I actually did send an email about it yesterday with some ideas, trying to generate some conversation. I haven't heard anything back yet. Do plan to try to schedule a meeting later this week on it. Try to actually be somewhat controversial, but not too controversial, just to get the conversation going. So that's how it's going.
That's how it's going. All right.
A little bit of progress. A little bit of progress.
Hey, Larry, can we do shout-outs before we dive into...
Thank you for reminding me, David. Let's do that. Go ahead.
I just checked the wiki, and I didn't see anything on there, but we can still open the floor. Is there anybody who would like to recognize a fellow community member for great work he or she has done over the last week or two?
It's all outstanding. Hard to call anything out, isn't it?
Sure, there's a lot of great work going on. But as a reminder, as you go about your week and you see something that you definitely want to recognize, either kind of make a note to yourself to bring it up at these meetings or add it. There's an acknowledgement page on the wiki, so feel free to add it there as well.
Larry, one other thing. A couple people, including myself, had issues with the crowd login this week.
Yeah, I saw that.
I think right now we have a problem where we have kind of a single point of failure, and when that single point of failure is on PTO, we can't. It's hard to get things fixed, and that's maybe a knowledge issue. Other people may have access and just not the knowledge, but
I think that's probably what it is. Yeah, it's a great point. I've had a couple of things like that as well, and we need to not entirely depend on Luca for those things when he's out of town or logged off.
Yeah, and even right now, I think that we have a clock sync issue, and I don't know how to get that fixed.
All right.
I lost access to YouTube, so I can't post it.
I'm sorry, couldn't quite hear that.
I said I've lost access to YouTube, so I can't post any videos. So I don't know who.
Well, I can fix
that. Okay. And we just happen to be going through Lab ONF transition on a lot of things, so perfect time for things to break. All right, David, point well taken. We need to do something about that. By the way, back to the acknowledgments. The page moved, and if you look at the home wiki page, Luke and I did quite a bit of reorganizing to try to simplify it. And actually, I guess there's probably a little bit of new content there that you might not have seen before. So it's probably worth everyone's time just to take a quick run through the documentation just to see how it's organized, and maybe that helps you help someone else when they're trying to find something. And as I think everyone knows, we're also trying to migrate some more software-focused per release material to the guide. There is a draft guide running, but it needs to be updated, and Luca is the owner of the script that does that. So it's a little bit lagging, but there is activity there. Oh, in fact, of the material, I think a fair amount of it is in the contributing to Cord page. So there's a new page. I think it's new on documenting Cord. There was some work earlier on what every developer needs to know, and that's where the community acknowledgments page went. Anyway, take a look at that and make sure it all remains relatively consistent, and there aren't any orphans or dead links. Okay, so if we have time at the end, we can come back to any other sync up we need to do on the various projects, but why don't we move on. So as a lot of you know, we have right in the midst of a transition, moving people and projects and so on from ON Lab to ONF. And as part of that bigger project, Lyndon, I just made you presenter. Great. So let me do just a quick introduction.
Thanks.
As part of that effort, what used to be ONF working groups are migrating into a more software project model. Doesn't mean that they only do software, but we're trying to make the align as best we can different efforts in a project-like way. And one of those is the Open Transport, was working group, now project. And they're in the process of trying to find the best ways to make connections with other things going on in the broader organization. And so they want to have a chance just to talk about what's going on and make sure everyone is aware of it. So go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Larry. Thanks for the introduction. So let me just have a few slides about the open transport activity, and let me also introduce a couple of other people on the call that are involved. So my name is Lyndon Ong, and I had been chairing the Open Transport Working Group. I also have on the call Kartik Seturaman, who is leading the Transport API project, and Giorgio Casaniga, who is leading the wireless transport project within Open Transport. So both of them are on the line as well. And so Open Transport, we're in this process of kind of transitioning it from an ONF working group into a project. And the goal, we think, pretty much stays the same. It's basically just extending SDN to carrier transport networks and technologies. And we have kind of four sub-projects. We started off actually when we initially formed the group doing some transport extensions for OpenFlow. So we did optical extensions and layer 1 extensions. And we had a version 1 and a version 1.1 that was released, I think, last year. At the moment, there's not a lot of work going on that. There's more work going on in the Transport API project. We have a Layer 0, Layer 1 modeling project, and we have the wireless transport project. And all three of those are pretty active. And the Transport API and the wireless transport in particular have very substantial software pieces to them. Some of the history, so we have done some ONF technical specs and technical requirements. There are two ONF open source projects that are associated with the work. There's one called Snowmass, which holds the software that's and specs that are related to the Transport API project, and one called Centennial, which holds the software and models for the wireless transport work. And we've had a number of demonstrations and proof of concepts. We had one in 2014 on the OpenFlow extensions, one in 2016 on Transport API. Both of those were kind of joint with the Optical Internetworking Forum. And we've had 4 proof of concepts actually now of the wireless transport work, each of them kind of really organized around a sponsoring carrier. And so we have a project charter proposal, which is up with, and Larry and Timon have had a look at it. And one of Timon's comments in particular was that he would like to see some more specifics around joint work, or a project that would combine the open transport work and Cord work. And two that we have been thinking about is one is Cord interconnection, maybe using the Transport API, and the other was maybe some work combining M-Cord and the wireless transport work. And it's, I think right now they're just high level, bullets. And I think what we'd ideally like to do is kind of drill down into something that's more specific with those. All right, any questions so far?
So I think, so,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, so, okay, I bet you're going to get into it right now, but
okay.
you have been talking a little bit with the Cord team. Is that, or on both cases, have there been conversations on, is this?
I don't think there have been really organized conversations, I guess. I mean, I think Kartik has interacted kind of at a technical level with some of the ONOS people, and I've been talking with Mark Deline here, but actually on a separate project. So I think we haven't really had a lot of real detailed discussion yet.
Okay, thanks. And this is now starting to look familiar. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this has been kind of our kind of general high-level model for transport SDN and how it might fit into carrier networks. And so we kind of look at the kind of the northbound and southbound aspects. And so the transport API really focuses on sort of the northbound interface from a controller, at least at the moment, and being able to coordinate multiple controllers together. And the transport API is kind of designed so that you can really get sort of a variation in how you use it, from a pretty abstract view that's more or less technology agnostic to what the controller is doing, to a more detailed view where you get technology specific information about what the network is doing or the domain is doing. And then at the sort of the southbound technology level, we have the work on the microwave model, which when we started that, there really was no microwave model, so it was all pretty new. And we've kind of talked about a device level model that would be an extension from the TAPI work, but we haven't really pushed hard on that yet, partly because we think that there's actually a lot of kind of similar work that's coming out from different other bodies in the industry, like the Open ROADM work or Open Config and TIP, and so we're a little unsure about how we want to proceed with that. Although there's interest in proceeding with that.
Could I have a question before you move on?
Sure.
And then I'll display my ignorance. So this is TAPI is a transport API.
Mm-hmm.
If my transport were built out of, I'm trying to distinguish between what's at the edge and what's in the transport, and maybe that's a broken way of thinking about it. But if the transport is built as, I'll just take packet optical in the middle because I know that's where a lot of the ONOS work is happening. I guess what I'm trying to do is reconcile. I get that, and there could be an API for that, and you could acquire a connection of some kind in between a pair of points. I'm trying to reconcile that with the data center controller, which would, in my view, be a user of a transport API, but not a provider of a transport API.
Yeah. So probably one of the questions is how the two integrate. I mean, we really haven't dealt with the data center controller too much. We have mostly been looking at sort of the microwave and the optical controllers, and with the idea that there's something that's controlling them and pulling out information about the network resources and requesting services out of the controllers, like connectivity or virtual network or path computation or something like that. Now, I guess what the relationship is with the data center controller is, something that, we probably need to talk about it. I kind of stuck it in this diagram, but I can't say that we've really talked a whole lot about what the relationship is.
Okay, so
is the data control, for example, I mean, this multi-domain controller is a function, right? So it could be that is something that is pulled into the same system that is the data center controller, or maybe the data center controller looks more like an application that's using the multi-domain controller. It's that's something that I wanted to. That's kind of something that we probably need to discuss and understand what your thoughts are about it and how you would see the relationship.
So a related, so another question is when you talk about an optical controller, that is, your focus is on the agent, that the controller is in the abstract, or are you working with a particular controller?
So it's the intention with the API is that that's something that could be supported by lots of different controllers. And so when we did the demonstration, for example, in fourth quarter last year, we had several different vendors that provided controllers and optical equipment. Some of it was layer 0, some of it was layer 1, some of it was layer 2. And the controllers varied. Some of the vendors were using their own homegrown controllers. Others were using ONOS-based controllers. I think in one case was an ODL-based controller. But because they were all using the same transport API interface, it was, the objective was for the multi-domain controller basically to be able to look at and interact with each of the controllers in kind of the same way.
Thanks. So one other final question, I'll let you move on, is the relationship to the Presto interface. So could you say just a little bit about the relationship between TAPI and Presto?
Sure. I don't know, maybe I should kick that over to Kartik actually, because he's been working kind of partly in ONF and partly in MEF for that as well.
Go ahead.
You want to say a little about that?
Yeah, okay, sure, Lyndon. So yeah, I'll just mention that, but just before that, like Larry, your previous question was, yes, the transport API treats the controller in the abstract, almost like a black box, and the APIs that we defined or we designed, we were basing it on use cases rather than on the network or on the controller behavior, right? So that's to answer your previous question on that. As far as the LSO Presto is concerned, so LSO Presto went over a few iterations within MEF. So the previous iterations were the very first iteration, they started from scratch and they developed some APIs based on some use cases they had. And then the second iteration, they migrated that LSO Presto model and APIs on the ONF core model. But even that, they found it to be a little bit hard to work with. And finally, they decided to base it on transport API or TAPI model. So the way we visualize TAPI, the core TAPI is more like an API framework. The model itself just provides a framework and a technology agnostic framework. And then we add technology specific extensions to that TAPI framework. So these extensions specific, or it could be vendor specific, operator specific, or even by different SDO. So in this case, MEF is augmenting the TAPI model and the TAPI classes and the TAPI constructs with the specifications coming out of MEF 7.3, which is their service Ethernet service specifications, and adding attributes that are more specific to provisioning L2. That is as of now, the carrier Ethernet services.
Thanks.
But separately, MEF also has a project on L3 services and L1 service definitions, and the goal is to as the draft progresses, like we would actually augment the TAPI framework and the TAPI classes with both the L1 service definitions and the L3 service definitions. And this is primarily to at the what they call the Presto reference point, which is more like the point between the service orchestration function and the infrastructure control and management. Right, so that's where the focus is right now. And the initial focus is on the NRP, that's the provisioning interface, but there are projects which are already spawned off called Service OAM, which would also probably, you would want to use TAPI for those, and maybe like some other projects.
Thanks.
Hopefully it answers.
I'll let you guys get back to your regularly scheduled stuff.
Okay. Yes, let me go to the next slide. And all right, so you know, some of the characteristics that we were aiming for was like this technology agnostic framework and extensibility, interoperability, and like I said, it has a very substantial software component to it. It is basically we packaged a bunch of things together in what we call the software development kit, the kind of base model is defined in this protocol independent, technology agnostic UML language, graphic language, and from there we have been working pretty closely with the folks in the information modeling project and the tools that they developed to basically take the UML and auto-generate Yang data schema from that UML, and from the Yang data schema auto-generate a Swagger specification, and from there go to a reference implementation. So all of this UML, Yang, Swagger, and reference implementation are kind of all together packaged as the SDK, and that is what is on the part of the Snowmass open source project and is posted on a GitHub site. The interface itself, the API itself, supports a number of different services or features. There's a topology feature for retrieving topology information, resource information. There's a connectivity feature for creating connectivity services. We're in the process of adding support for resilience or protection to that. There's a path computation service. There's an ONM service, which allows you to basically I guess, provision ONM functionality like performance monitoring and alarms and things like that. There's a notification service to subscribe to autonomous notifications from the network of state changes and alarms. And then there's a virtual network service, which you know, we're still working on, but it's starting off as sort of a ability to request sort of a package of connectivity at the same time to connect multiple virtual network sites. So at the moment, there's an STK 1.0 that was released in the fall of last year. We're now on 2.0. We're not quite done with 2.0 yet, but we're getting pretty close. All right, so I don't know, anything else you wanted to add about TAPI, Kartik?
No, I think you covered it all, unless there are specific questions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, from here I'm going to transition into wireless transport. So if there's any specific questions on TAPI, that would be good time for it.
One question.
Yep.
So connectivity kind of things, I'm sure that you guys are working together with MEF. For the OEM, is that kind of thing is similarly happening, or?
Yeah,
sure
the OEM work is being done pretty pretty closely with some folks from MEF. In fact, that's been actually one of the main activities on 2.0, because we kind of have started out with a model that was kind of network oriented for OAM, and I think we got a lot of input from the MEF folks to make it more add sort of user oriented aspects to it.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, the question reason I asked was that on the eCore we are collaborating with microsemi folks, which I believe was referencing the MEF OAM stuff. So I was wondering how close we are. So that was
okay. Okay, that'd be interesting to see. See how close they are in relationship to this. Oh, good to know. Was that a question? Okay, shall I go on?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so then transitioning to the second project is the wireless transport, and so the wireless transport work, like I said, it's kind of more down a level. So it is it has this model that and the main participants are folks who are doing microwave transport devices. The model there is more of a southbound controller interface. So you have different microwave devices from different vendors, and they have either a netcom server built in, or there's a mediation system built in, and they use a common microwave information model. So the SDN controller can use netconf to configure the devices using the microwave information model. I think one of the things that may not be that clear from this diagram is that at least as far as I understand, and Giorgio, feel free to comment on it. While all the devices are using the same, presenting the same microwave information model, they are not really multi-vendor interoperable in the sense that you have like one microwave device from one vendor talking to another microwave device from the same vendor, controlled through the information model, but not really devices from one vendor talking to another vendor because of differences in the media layer.
Yes, Lyndon, that's correct. So the interworking at the data plane level, at the microwave level, is done always, let's say, the same vendor provide the link, so the two ends of the link. And interworking at the data plane level is done through a client signal, can be Ethernet signal, for example. But all the links, microwave links, are managed in the same way. So the same parameter, the same management, the same model, and so on.
And as you can see in the picture, the proof of concepts now have proceeded. At least past couple of proof of concepts have been using Open Daylight as the SDN controller. There was a fourth proof of concept which was just completed last month. So it was, I think, sponsored by Deutsche Telekom this time. Previous ones were sponsored by AT&T and by Telefonica. So the proof of concept, again, demonstrated the implementation of the microwave model, and successive proof of concepts have kind of implemented more sophisticated microwave models with more attributes. It also integrated a model for timing based on 1588, and as Giorgio was mentioning, there's also an Ethernet model so that there's communication between the different vendor equipment using Ethernet. And in this case, there were 19 companies involved, 14 vendors, the 3 telco operators, again, Telefonica, AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, as well as some software providers. So this is all hosted in a laboratory, the equipment hosted in a laboratory in Bonn, and the software, I think, was in Prague, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
So I realize
Yes.
it's not really directly connected, but did any of these POCs treat this as a backhaul network for a wireless? The microwave is backhaul network, or have there been POCs in that direction?
George speaking. Yeah. So the idea here was to simulate a network. In general, microwave is used for backhaul network, backhaul application. In the POC, in the test bench, we had simulated, if you want, a chain or a tree of microwave links back-to-back connected. There was an ODR controller that was not located in the same location, was in data center in Czech Republic, so thousands of kilometers, controlling the network. And there was, let's say, traffic generated by instruments, tools, not generated by real node B or real traffic, because in this demo, in this POC, there is no RAN vendors, are more microwave and so wireless transport vendors providing the calling solution.
So I don't know if this is helpful at all, but I know there had been some talk about trying to find out, thinking about this work in the context of transport between a RAN and the core, and that would be a really nice end-to-end kind of scenario if it worked. I don't know that if there's anyone on from the Cord team, but just one to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. This at the end is also what I think Lyndon is going to present. So how to get these very specific, if you want, part of the network in a broader context in order to have these managed as, if you want, connectivity, that in this case is micro, but okay, is technology if you want. But at the end, from an upper layer is connectivity to provide connection between the edge and the core part of the network. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess with respect to M-Cord, I think we're probably a little unsure about how to make the right connections to people working on M-Cord. Is that, so any help that you guys can give us on that would be great.
Well, it is a little bit orthogonal, but there is a transport aspect that has been, as far as I know, under considered. I mean, the focus has been on the RAN and then on the EPC, but not arguably what connects them when they're not co-located.
Yeah, maybe it may be kind of similar with, in some senses, with the TAPI, in that it's something where the focus has been this is sort of kind of an extension or kind of ancillary to work that's been done before, but now looking at connecting multiple locations together.
Yeah.
So it might be a similar model. So this is just a kind of an architectural picture that we're kind of trying to fit the microwave work into kind of an overall picture with Cord and ONOS. And I think we have, in the microwave work, mostly been working on the model and mapping that to a netconf Yang interface to the device or to a mediation system. Giorgio, was there anything specific you wanted to mention about this diagram?
Yes, maybe just to add that, okay, as you see here, this is, if you want, a broader picture that everyone knows. And of course, with the WT activities, we are covering the connectivity between, in this case, is not ONOS, but is ODL, and the micro devices. What is, in my view, interesting and is on the table is how to integrate these in a broader architecture where there is, for example, M-Cord for the mobile that is driving this connectivity. And so what we need to understand better is how really, and also Linda was saying, to connect with the M-Cord, so to have some reference to start to discuss, for example, which kind of these are called network intent-based API can be used for this scope. Can be TAPI, okay, can be TAPI for micro, the same of TAPI for optical. So starting to discuss how to put in a broader context what is today done for the micro part, and then of course for optical as well.
Okay, so I mean that's a brief about the wireless transport activity, and then didn't realize that was multiple animation there. So really, I think what we wanted to do ultimately is to drill down a little more on how Cord activities and activities in the open transport work could be tied together. And really, I don't know that we've had any more detailed thoughts than what I have on this slide, but we have talked about, well, can we maybe use TAPI as a way of doing coordination of multiple Cord sites connecting across a wide area optical network, where the Cord sites are controlled by ONOS, the wireless domain, the WAN domains could be different technologies, but using TAPI as the API to access information and services from the domains. We went so far as to talk a little bit with some carriers, and we had an interim meeting that was sponsored by China Mobile earlier in the year, and that was actually kind of the first thing that they came up with that they thought they might be interested in was kind of connection between eCord sites using the wide area network.
Yeah, that one is definitely the sweet spot. It sounds like the most obvious mapping.
And China Mobile was the one that kind of expressed interest in it. I know China Telecom has also been doing their own testing with TAPI, and their own they had their own TAPI kind of test bed set up with I think 3 of their vendors. And then Telefonica has also been interested. Telefonica is actually interested. I think there was some interest from Telefonica in sort of seeing combination of the TAPI and wireless transport work, and that maybe including a wireless transport domain as one of the domains that's of technology that's kind of linked together through TAPI. And then as far as wireless transport, again, we're looking for ways that the wireless transport technology could be tied in with a Cord-based application,
so strictly speaking, from a Cord perspective and not an ONOS perspective, I don't think Cord is. Let me say it a different way. Cord is very agnostic as to what the underlying technology is, but the two scenarios are multiple sites connected by some transport backbone, and a distributed Cord site with a core piece and one or more edge pieces. And you can think of that as the backhaul, but it is that that connection from the very, very edge, whether it's a cell tower or whatever, back to the central office. So those are kind of the two generic pieces. The wireless transport would be interesting, I think, as you just said, as yet another backbone technology or as a backhaul technology.
All right, that sounds optimistic. So so I guess what do you see as next steps? What I think from a project point of view, we'd like to see if we can define some more specific objectives that would kind of tie the Cord and OTS work together. From project-oriented view, we'd like to understand more about how to kick off an activity along those lines. Whether that involves, finding a carrier that sponsors it, or opening up some sort of joint discussions. I guess as we're not that familiar with how the Cord work operates, but we'd like to understand that better.
Yeah. So let me just speak to that for a second. The E-cords and M-cords are technically sub-projects or projects of Cord, but this particular weekly call and some of the engineering planning meetings are well coordinated. But from a community perspective, they operate fairly autonomously, and it tends to be the case that this call is a little bit more focused on the commonality of the platform, so to speak. So my sense would be the best traction would be with, and again, driven likely by some proof of concept with one or more carriers that was interested in it. In the E-cord example, where TAPI is being used as part of the backbone interconnecting cord sites. And again, I don't know that this is particularly germane, but again, the backhaul and maybe mobile cord, there would be you would find maybe it's Telefonica that would be really interested in edge M-cord backhaul to core cord. So it sounds like there's been some, like you said, there's been some. Well, if you've talked to Mark, I imagine that's about the packet optical southbound side, but he would be also the right person from the E-cord perspective.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've talked to Mark separately on other testing that he was doing for packet optical.
But from an E-cord, I would say that the E-cord meets China Mobile meets TAPI would be the opportunity.
Okay.
That would be my reading on it. Others may please chime in if you have other thoughts on that.
From the eco side, I think I completely agree with that. So we are currently using the previous iteration of MEF NRP API due to the fact that back then ONOS didn't really have good support of Yang and so on, so we weren't able to directly consume TAPI and stuff. So we may want to revisit the current state of Yang toolset and RESTCON support and see if we can use TAPI as a front-end API to the existing code base we have. So that's something we may want to consider discussing, maybe moving forward.
Yes, Giorgio speaking. For what is concerning micro and wireless, just to mention that I had just today the weekly call we had in the team. And just today, for example, the AT&T representative was asking, because we passed, let's say, the last POC last month, so we are defining the plan for the next month. And one of the goals was from the AT&T was to understand better how really to put this microwave, let's say, and the architecture that we put in place in a context of M-cord. And so I just noted that today I had this participation, so we have to follow up on their side. They are putting some people also that are working on this project may be available just to have some because the people on WT project on our side is not very familiar with Cord architecture and requirement. So we are starting some activity, but just to say that there is an interest from TNT and as well from Deutsche Telekom to put for wireless in the context of Cord what we are doing. That's important as well in my view. And the whole is for sure the application that, just to give you a number today, I think that 90% of the micro application is backhaul. So I think that the call for micro is sort of basic and prime application. So it's important to have also for M-Cord some reference in order to start to interact and understand how to possibly organize something.
Okay, so I think this you do have a couple leads. What I'll do, we need to wrap up and just close out the meeting here pretty quickly. But I will, if it's okay, I'll forward your slides to the broader community and include emails so that you people have your contact information. And otherwise, I'm just sitting in on meetings like this and the more specific M-Cord and E-Cord variants of that. Hopefully these meetings are all listed on the ONF calendar. They're supposed to be. Anything else?
Well, I think this is a great start. I mean, from my viewpoint. So
Great.
Hopefully. All right. Thanks very much for offering the time slot.
Thanks to you. So before we conclude, is there anything else anyone has? All right, call it a day then, and thanks everybody. Bye-bye.